So hello everybody, you're very welcome this morning. Thank you for joining us for our follow-up session on rethinking volunteering in environmental and heritage groups in light of COVID. We had our first session back at the start of June, and it was just on the cusp of kind of public spaces and parks and outdoor and spaces and properties, manor houses that are opening to guests, just on the cusp of those sites opening. So it was really timely. It was really timely for us to have that chat at that point in time. And obviously this is just a follow-up to see how are you doing, the projects that we're thinking of reintroducing volunteers, how has that been going, what has worked, what hasn't, and for you to just have those conversations. So these sessions are very casual, relaxed. There's no pressure to speak if you don't want to. You can keep muted, you can put your video off, whatever you feel comfortable with. You take out of it what you want and need. And you can also ask us questions after this session if there's something in more detail or in private that you'd like to discuss. And needless to say, you can connect with each other after this as well. So if there's a particular group you wanted to reach out, just let us know and we'll get consent from them. So my name is Raquel. I work as an events officer with Volunteer Now, and very shortly my role is to recruit, manage, train and motivate volunteers for big scale events, mainly that come to Northern Ireland, and that's in partnership with Tourism NI. So, and then we also offer those services at a cost to any other volunteering involving organization, not-for-profit organization that wants to involve volunteers at events and would like our help to do so, or to bring our own volunteers, or to recruit volunteers for them. So that's it. Then I'll let Lindsay have a wee introduction at what she does and maybe a bit about Volunteer Now in general, what we do, and then I'll introduce our two speakers.
Thanks, Raquel, and good morning, everybody. Lovely to see everybody again. As Raquel said, my name is Lindsey Armstrong. I'm Community Projects Manager at Volunteer Now. So as I'm sure most of you are aware, volunteering is at the heart of everything that we do at Volunteer Now, right across a range of different activities. But my particular people, particularly across the Greater Belfast area. So we would have a range of volunteer involving services that we provide for vulnerable older people who would be referred on to us maybe through a social worker or through there's new wellbeing coordinators in Belfast who work with the trust. So people who maybe need a wee bit of extra support. And that's for a range of different things. It could be, we have a befriending service, which has moved to a telephone befriending service because of COVID, and we've taken on additional referrals for people that were sort of in an emergency situation and needed a wee bit of additional support because of COVID. So we're doing that. We have a befriending, a volunteer driving scheme, which is around taking older people to medical appointments, hospital appointments, doctor's appointments, and we also then, in response to COVID, created a shopping support role. And again, that was for those vulnerable older people who were shielding, who were finding it difficult to get out, who maybe needed a bit of extra support to buy some of those fresh foods like the milk and bread and fruit and vegetables. Obviously, food parcels were being delivered to certain members of the community, but it didn't really involve those fresh items. So that's where our volunteers come in to help support those people to make sure they had access to those kind of provisions that they needed. And then we also are providing support to older people's groups across Belfast, capacity building with them, making sure that older people's voices are heard through our platform called the G6, which is a representation of all the senior citizens forums across Belfast. And then we would do other work around for older people in terms of maybe mental health, physical health and well-being. Again, all these people are either volunteers themselves or who are supporting other people in the community by volunteering. And that's kind of the range of what we do. We also have a driving scheme that I would manage in Northern Ireland, and that is for looked after children. So that is transporting looked after children to schools, or it could be to a contact visit with an estranged parent. So those sort of activities are part and parcel of what we do. And I also would work with Raquel in terms of our events side of the house as well. So there hasn't been too many of those in the last wee while, as everybody sitting on this will recognise, but we're hopeful 2021 will be the year. We've got to be positive that we can get those events up and running again, which would be great. So that's me.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and just have the speaker. So hopefully everybody will be able to see who's speaking. Let's see. Yeah. And so I want to thank the two organizations that have agreed to share what they've been doing and what they're planning on doing in the future. So the first, it will be Jenny Ferguson and Tammy will pitch in as well from the National Trust. And they can tell you a little, obviously, because it's a regional organization, we thought it'd give you a really good overview of the variety of sites, the variety of roles, the variety of volunteers that they have. So it gives us a really good idea, you know, on many different levels of things to consider, and some of your projects may be similar in some areas. So Jenny, are you happy enough to give us a bit of an overview of what's been happening?
Sure. Thank you, Raquel. Hello, everyone. I know some of you. Hi, Helen. Nice to hear your voice, even if I can't see you. Okay. I'm sure you have a reasonable understanding of the National Trust as a conservation charity. Can you hear me okay, by the way? My headset's a bit funny today. If it's okay, great job. Let me know if it goes a bit dodgy, and I'll stop talking. So yes, National Trust Conservation and Access charity look after lots of different places across Northern Ireland. So ranging from gardens, parkland, beaches, mountains, houses, mansion houses, more vernacular buildings, you know, really varied. And the coronavirus has pretty much been devastating to the National Trust, as it has for pretty much everyone. So for a long time we weren't able to welcome visitors or members to our site, and that included volunteers. Just, I suppose, the context that we're working in this, and the reason why I'm saying this is because it influences how we work with volunteers at the minute, is that the organisation is currently going through massive restructuring as a result of the huge drop in income, and we've just finished a 45-day consultation period, so people will be hearing early next month if their roles are going to be at risk of redundancy, and it's widespread risks of redundancy. So in terms of involving volunteers, well, obviously we always want to work ethically and legally when we're involving volunteers, but a big part of the role at the minute is making sure that through this period of change with coronavirus and all of the inherent risks that brings, but also trying to involve our volunteers well at a time when staff are, you know, there's lots of questions about what's a staff role, what's a volunteer role. You know, that it's difficult, you know, bringing all of that together, and the two, you know, intertwine at lots of different stages. So lots of conversations about job substitution, you know, that kind of thing. I'm going to pass to Tammy shortly to talk a little bit more about how it's actually been working at Mount Stewart and Strangford, which is the area where she's the volunteering and partnership manager. Across Northern Ireland, we have been able to start to return our volunteers, which is great. We've got about 280 back in a variety of roles across Northern Ireland, most of them outdoors, so ranger roles, garden roles, etc. And that's probably about 12% of our total, so still lots and lots of volunteers that aren't able to volunteer with us. And actually we furloughed really deeply. About 80% of our staff were furloughed, so actually in terms of those opportunities to develop remote volunteering, we really needed to have more staff in to be able to do that. So it's really interesting to hear from those of you earlier who were talking about how that's gone for you. I'd love to hear more about that. So gradually we've been starting to look at some of the other components of our places. So commercial, so for example, secondhand bookshops, and what that's like to re-involve volunteers. Some started to open a couple of our houses, so Castle Ward and the Argery are open, and that's been interesting, trying to make sure that we can provide safe experiences for our volunteers and our visitors, and doing that. But good, actually, particularly in the Argery, you know, they've had to work really differently with their volunteers in a really positive way, so it's actually been a positive thing for them. Just briefly, we're only now just about to start, just actually this morning, the guidance was signed off, thankfully, to re-involve group volunteers, so, you know, corporate groups, etc. That's taken ages to actually get through, but it's been something that we really keenly missed. We're only able to recruit new volunteers under very limited circumstances at the minute because of the challenges that we have around the consultation period. But what we're really trying to get to at the minute is we're so aware that so many of our volunteers aren't able to volunteer with us at the minute, and they really love our places. They love our places much more than they love the National Trust. You know, so how do we keep our connection with them, and how do we support them to continue to derive some benefits from their volunteering relationship with the National Trust, even through that social element, just keeping up to date. And for those volunteers who are coming back, we had been in a place where a lot of it was about supporting staff to carry out essential tasks. Obviously, the staff still accountable for those, and volunteers, very narrow areas that they were able to deliver in, but increasingly now introducing much more those kind of discretionary tasks that volunteers really love to get involved in. It all just felt a bit about driving capacity to look after places for a while, rather than that whole kind of mutual benefit piece, which is what we really want, you know, that people are deriving, you know, it's not just about what the National Trust get out of it, it's what the volunteers get out of it too. So it's been an interesting time, and now we're you know, the Trust is going to be moving through change over the next 6 months, really, in terms of new structures, quite wide-scale redundancies, etc. So there's a lot to do at the minute in terms of thinking about the impacts on volunteering and how we can develop flexible and positive volunteering models, which work well with our new staff structures. And the big challenge in that is going to be how we make sure that our volunteers are involved in creating those new models. So for my regional role, those are the kind of areas that I'm looking at the minute, but I'll pass over to Tammy to tell you more about what's actually happening at our places and some of the challenges of actually bringing volunteers back and what that's like.
Hello, is that me then? Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm guessing that you can. Yes, Jenny's nodding at me, so that's a good sign. Hi. I'm not sure that I know many of you. I'm looking at the names. I'm not sure that I recognise any of them, but my role at Mount Stewart is to specifically work with the volunteers. I look after partnerships and a few other bits and bobs too. But volunteering is the thing that I'm mostly responsible for at Mount Stewart and Strangford Lough. And when we last chatted, which seems eons ago, I think we had just begun the process of beginning to bring back some volunteers. And I'll be honest, I was quite nervous about that. I think I was aware of the responsibility of making sure that our processes were right, that our volunteers felt secure and safe in coming back. But here we are a few months later, and I feel very relaxed about it. And the good news is that it's actually not as frightening or scary as initially I thought. We've got 130 volunteers back out of our sort of 400-ish. I've got others who are champing at the bit to be back, but we don't have capacity to re-involve them yet. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is managing people's expectations of when they can come back and what they can get involved with doing. So 130 or so that we've got back, most of them are doing their roles outdoors. There would have been gardeners, rangers on Strangford Lough, rangers on Mount Stewart Domain. We've got a couple of volunteers now back in retail, and we set up new procedures for them. And we're now working towards getting volunteers back indoors, and that's a whole new challenge and sort of new stuff for us to get our heads around there. But getting them back outdoors actually was really straightforward once we'd worked out our processes. And I heard somebody in their introduction was saying that they were just, I think maybe it was Helen, maybe NMNI was saying, you know, we think we've got our processes right, we just need to roll them out now. And I found that having a really clear set of steps for reintroducing volunteers really helped, and I stuck with those really consistently, and it helped the volunteers feel secure. It helped explain to other volunteers why we couldn't get them back yet, and it meant that everybody has stuck with the same procedure. So all I'm doing really, initially I just asked who wanted to come back, who really felt now was a time for them to re-involve themselves with us, because not all of them wanted to. And actually before I did that, I kind of looked to see, well, what are our opportunities? Where could we re-involve them? And then I found out, well, who wanted to. And then those who did have gone through an online sort of bit of, we call it reopening safely. It's something in-house that was produced just to make sure that everybody has done the same sort of training in terms of how we keep ourselves COVID safe and COVID secure. All staff do it, all volunteers do it. It's the same training for everybody. And it means we're all kind of on the same page and we know sort of what our processes are. And once they've done that and they've had a chat with me, and we've had sort of lots of emails pinging backwards and forwards, making sure that each individual volunteer is content and happy, they then get handed on to their volunteer manager, who's the person sort of on the ground really, who deals with them on a day-to-day basis. So you've got the bit where you're dealing with your volunteers, but of course you have to do your work with your volunteer managers too. And Helen, I think that's what you were referring to when you were talking about getting staff to a place where they're confident to work with volunteers again. Our guys here, part of their contract is that they work with volunteers, so they kind of know it's a no-brainer. They have to at some point re-engage with volunteers. And all of the volunteer managers who work outdoors were very comfortable with that. They weren't concerned because it's outdoors, and they knew that they could have small groups of volunteers working socially distanced with very few difficulties. We've instigated a no tool sharing policy. Nobody shares tools at all. The tools that you have given to you in the morning are the ones that you sanitize at the end of the day, and you don't share them with anybody else. We have limited numbers of people in the indoor sort of where the gardeners, for example, might meet. We have sort of restrictions on the numbers of people that can be in those spaces at any one time. But for the vast majority of the time, they're outdoors. They bring their own lunch. They bring their own coffee. Nobody buys lunch here anymore. So we've become much more self-sufficient. And it's working really well. The guys that are back are loving it. It feels like a part of their life which they had to put on pause has been sort of brought back to them, which they're really happy with. So outdoor volunteering is going pretty well. Really, really comfortable with how that is. One of the things we did start doing, because there are so many volunteers who are not back yet, we've done a couple of sessions where we've had 15 volunteers at a time coming in as a work party. And they've just been working in our sort of visitor reception, the outdoor visitor reception area, sort of the pathways coming into visitor reception, and the areas that we just don't have the extra pairs of hands to keep looking sort of presentable. And that's been a really lovely bit of light touch volunteering that's worked really well, because there is asked for them to come back every week, but to do a one-off session where they can do the online training. They're trained up in terms of reopening safely training, and they come on in and they're just doing sweeping, brushing, tidying up, and the place looks loads better for it, and they get such a hit from that, and it's really kept them going until they can come.
I think we've lost Tammy for a bit. It's those thick walls at Mount Stewart. So we'll maybe see if she comes back.
She has been doing such a stand-up job there. I mean, it's amazing. I think one of the things just that she was...
Jen, I can hear you.
Oh, there you go.
She's been terrible. She's been really awful. But you know, genuinely that bit about actually just trying to keep the relationships with our volunteers over this period of time is something that Tammy's just done so well. And that's what, you know, in our other places, you know, when that's where volunteering is really working well again. It's when there's, you know, really strong attention given to those, you know, keeping the volunteer relationships going. Sorry, Tammy.
I have to say that's for me is the most time-consuming bit. I do more little individual emails, almost like little texts, in the way that you might do to friends. It's become much more labor-intensive in terms of those relationships, which need much more attention and care than perhaps they would have done before, because you're really managing people's concerns and fears and expectations. when we first went into lockdown, one of the things we set up was a thing that we called East Down Cares. Our property group's called East Down, and that was like a number of staff who said that they would be willing to do shopping, pick up prescriptions for volunteers or staff who were unable to. And very much we try to create the sense of whether you're a volunteer or whether you're a staff, we're one big family and we'll help each other through this. And I think little gestures like that really made a difference to them, and being kept well informed. All of our volunteers would get national information from the National Trust, but to be honest, like Jenny said, they may sometimes be a bit frustrated with the National Trust, but they love the property that they work in, and that sort of keeping that connection with newsletters and gestures like East Down Cares, and giving them links to local providers of services too. So when you guys sent out links for local services that they could access, or when Ards and North Down Borough Council did that, we forwarded that on to all of the volunteers, just to kind of keep them in the loop, really. Am I telling you stuff that you want to know? Is this interesting? Because do stop me if it's not.
Tammy, can I ask a question just about
sure.
a project that I am due to open in Oma? I'm going to try and do something, one session in October, or the end of September, and one in October. So this will be my first time coming back. So if there was anything that you could share in terms of, like, I mean, I'm already thinking about a contact list. I'm thinking about taking temperatures, because it's people that are coming back to our service that are, I may well get a lot of them back, but I may well not, because they may be shielding, or they may be worried. Some of the volunteers are older as well, because it's a garden project. So if there was anything that you felt was particularly important, I know about the contact list. I know about the taking the temperature. I know about them doing me doing a risk assessment, and then individual risk assessments. I'm also aware about the sharing the tools. I've done a little bit of volunteering work, and some of the work that I've done, they did the same. They didn't share any tools and things like that. But if there's anything else that you can think of that you could share with me, just so that I'm on the right path to begin with, because these people, they're wheelchair users. They are people with that may have had to shield, but and are willing now, because there's personal circumstances, are willing to come back out into the garden, because we can keep them completely separate. We can have somebody in the herb garden, we can have somebody in the polytunnel, we can, we can keep them separated. But I'm just thinking, is there anything else I need to know and that I haven't thought of?
Okay. We don't take temperatures. We do have everybody's contact details, because they're formally our volunteers, so we have all of their details that way. So we would know who is in and who we'd need to contact should we need to do a test and trace type scenario. But because they're outdoors, we don't have to do anything in terms of being compliant with test and trace, and we don't take temperatures. But our online training right from the beginning is, if you don't feel it's right for you to volunteer again yet, you're not letting us down at all, so that's fine, and come back and visit us. So we've done a lot of that. I've done an open evening. We would never open in the evenings normally, but just for staff and volunteers, so that they still have that ability to come back and be here even if they're not volunteering. So part of it was keeping them connected even if they didn't feel either physically ready or emotionally ready to get back with volunteering. But I don't take their temperatures. I think in terms of the spaces, if you work out that you can fit 4 volunteers in a space, the biggest challenge is which 4 volunteers, because if you have 8 or 10 that say, oh, I'd love to come back, you have to think, well, hang on, how do I facilitate 10 people who want to come back, but they can't all come back on the same day? And have you got the capacity in terms of who manages them or who supervises your volunteers? I found that a real challenge, because some people say, well, why can they come back and I can't come back? And that was more difficult. The real practical stuff that you get was, why have you chosen her and not me? So that was that's been a bit of a challenge. But I've tried to be really consistent, and I talk to the volunteer managers involved and make sure that the ones that we're inviting back, it's because their member of staff is back. That's why we've still got lots of our staff on furlough. So we do have some volunteers who are just disappointed, but that was a challenge in that, I think.
Thank you.
I would say all the normal stuff too. Bring your own food, bring your own drink, don't use indoor spaces. Think through the toileting type. If you've got wheelchair users, of course, you'll need sort of accessible toilets. We would have an in-house, what we call an enhanced hygiene procedure. So all of our facilities are cleaned 3 times a day, as per sort of regulations. But actually we say to volunteers, don't go into an indoor space if you don't need to. But we do have visitors in those spaces, so they're very welcome to. But we try and put as much of the responsibility into their hands, because there's a certain amount you can do to keep them safe, but actually they have to do a bit for themselves too, which is don't come in if you're not well, and wear a face mask if they feel more comfortable with that, all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Does that help?
No, that's helpful. Yes, thank you.
I was just going to add something that we had done as well. Well, in our processes, and so for any staff, before they access our sites, we ask them to fill in a health declaration form. So for volunteers who are going to be accessing our sites, we're going to ask them to complete that form as well. And we've produced some guidance just for volunteers around what to do well when you're volunteering. So, I mean, a lot of it is just common sense and based on, the public health agency advice. But it was just having that written up in a way that was friendly for volunteers, something that was accessible to them, advice on how to travel to your volunteering role, what will be different, just preparing people for what would be new.
And I suppose if we were sort of thinking that if we did a risk assessment, because that is the requirement for us to do a risk assessment or a volunteer assessment at the time that they come. But if they've done that, it would only be then if things changed. Would I be right in saying so if they were coming back the following month? Because we will close the project down at the end of October, just because obviously being allowed on site where we are, we're not allowed on site then in the winter months. So I'm trying to just do a few different specific things in September and October. But if they were coming to me in September and I did that, Helen and Tommy, would you still do something again in October, or would you be happy that you've done an assessment or a health and safety assessment? If you've done it once, you wouldn't need to do it again in October? Because there's been a lapse in time.
I always think of risk assessments as being dynamic. I mean, even if we think of them as static, because we do a basic, like every time I'm on site with volunteers, or have other responsibilities here where we would use risk assessments. And although we've got a risk assessment that might cover a particular scenario, every day that you're out on site, you're conducting a dynamic risk assessment, aren't you? You're looking at circumstance on that particular day. And we're living in a really fast-moving sort of set of instructions in how we're supposed to do stuff, with government saying 6 people indoors, 15 people outdoors. Oh no, we've changed that. Now you can meet with your neighbours. Now you can't. We're thinking, flip, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing anymore.
Yeah.
So we're all kind of trying to keep on top of stuff, aren't we? I think it's really challenging, but we've got one risk assessment that covers everything more broadly. But I would say to my volunteer managers, but just check, and we keep in touch, and we just keep it as.
I've lost Tammy again. Ellen, did you want to pitch into Michaela's question, or?
I suppose I was probably just going to agree with what Tammy was saying. If there has been a gap in time, I suppose it's about revisiting the risk assessment. It's not that it's a new risk assessment that you're carrying out. It's just touching base and revisit it. And
I suppose just Helen, I was thinking from the point of view that because of the circumstances, we would be the same, we would do it. But I suppose I was just thinking, because there was a lapse of a month, should I, is that something that you guys were thinking about, or is it fine that you would just be taking on board anything new and adding anything new as you normally would do? If you were there and seeing something different, that you would add that into the risk assessment. I suppose just for me, given the circumstances, have you come across anything that you would have to do differently? But it sounds that it's pretty much, it still falls under the same understanding of whenever you do the risk assessment initially. So
and I think I think what you're talking about is quite unique there, in terms of you're setting something up. There's going to be a break. Big break. So I haven't come across that, or we're not working in that environment yet. But I would just be revisiting it, and I suppose because of things changing so often at the moment as well, what government guidance and advice is going to impact on that role.
Sure.
I've taken to sending the risk assessment to the volunteers, so they've got sight of it. And although it's in risk assessment language, lots of them have got a background in previous careers where they would have been familiar with how you might write a risk assessment. And I just think if they've seen sight of it, it also helps them to step up and sort of take responsibility for some of it too. So it's not a bad thing to make your risk assessment really public to those who are going to be affected by it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
That's a good suggestion, Tammy. Thank you. Any more questions yet? Raise your hand. I do want to give Alan an opportunity to share a wee bit as well, but go ahead, Kelly.
So it was really just to Tammy, but also to the other members on the chat as well. What we're finding, we have a community garden, and throughout the sort of, as lockdown eased, I found that I really sensed such a reluctance with people. They were very nervous coming back. And so it's a small group. We're not dealing with big numbers in the same way the National Trust would be. So I've been tentatively reintroducing them, bringing them back onto the site. But obviously there's been a big boom of interest in gardening since this has all happened as well. So we've had more sort of interest, if you like, in terms of newer people coming along. And I just wondered, some people have suggested, you should be really promoting the garden at this time. Now, I have not been doing that. I've sort of instinctively felt quite, keep the group as they are and keep them going. But I just wondered if any of the group been, how it's worked with regards to new interest and new volunteers recruitment.
Yeah, I've definitely had a similar situation here. Definitely a pretty significant number of contacts saying, can I join your volunteering team? I'd love to volunteer with the Rangers, love to be out on Strangford Loch. And I've actually had to say no. So across the National Trust, there has been a pause on recruiting new volunteers. But locally, there is such an interest. So I sympathise. It's really hard because actually I think that what I have decided is that obviously I have to go with what the national sort of leadership are telling me is right to do, but I don't have the capacity to take on new volunteers, particularly when I have existing volunteers who are waiting in the wings thinking, when I come back, and they can't come back yet. And I think they'd be so annoyed if they thought I was bringing new people in and they were still waiting to come back. So I do think it's okay to say no. Yeah, exactly. I think it's okay to say no to people that, sometimes we just have to say, right now, it's not safe for me to increase this volunteer team to this particular size. And it's all about keeping people safe. But the appetite there, isn't it? But challenging.
It's about keeping people safe, but I think it's also just about, recognising the limits of our capacity to support volunteering really well at this particular time. And the thing I think that we need to do at the minute, as I say, we've now started that we can recruit new volunteers under really, really, really limited circumstances. Like it's by exception really more than anything else. But it's about just trying to look after the volunteers that we have and make sure that their experience is as good as it can be, or that if they're not able to volunteer with us, that we're able to put that time into actually keeping those relationships going, and they have to be our priority. I just think we just need to show that value to our current volunteers.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I think with us, because we were sort of in a recruitment stage, as it were, and as we move into the winter season, for us, the conservation side of things, we're on a nature reserve, so the garden will sort of, obviously that settles a bit for the winter, and then we move into the hands-on conservation work. So we can't do that without bringing people in, and it's a sort of a tricky one, because conservation work, not everybody wants to get stuck in a bog cutting gorse, So you've got a limited it's sort of like, hey, do you want to come and do this? It's not necessarily that appealing for everyone. So that was, for us, we still have to maybe try to attract volunteers, but it certainly feels tricky. It certainly feels tricky at this time.
I think if you're able to, if you feel confident you're able to meet the needs of your current volunteers, and you've got the capacity to look at to involve more, then there's no reason not to. But I think it's about just making sure that you've got your current volunteers right first, and that moving to recruit new volunteers isn't going to impact negatively on them.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
I was just going to mention as well, you know, it's very difficult to turn down an offer of help, but we would just maybe say to you in terms of the Be Collective, our site. So if there's something that the people come forward to you who want to volunteer and it's not appropriate, or you don't have capacity, please do send them on to our Volunteer Now website, Be Collective, and Jamie's here who looks after that side of things for us as well. So it might not be the right volunteer for you, or you might not have capacity, but there's lots of organisations that are currently looking for volunteers. So in some way, it's a bit of a way of disappointing people at one level, but giving them an option to kind of maybe view a wider range of organisations that they wouldn't necessarily know about.
Yeah, and we have just signed up for Be Collective, which is great. Yeah, it's a really good platform. Just seeing what other people are doing as well, what other organisations, what volunteering roles other organisations are actually offering in the sort of environmental sector. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, suppose if I could just come in there. I'm Jamie, and I'm the project coordinator for Be Collective Volunteer Now. I get the privilege, I suppose, of seeing what hundreds of organisations are doing at the minute to reinvent themselves or readapt themselves, and some of it is just genius. And I would get the odd phone call saying, I've forgotten how to take down the opportunities. You need to tell me, remind me straight away, because I've got so many applicants. You know, I need to stop this. Things like, you know, obviously a lot of your volunteers are orientated towards wanting to work outdoors and work with their hands and things like that. But there's still no reason why maybe you can't think way outside the box and say, well, what if we had somebody with digital skills who they can't come on the site, but they've got a background in digital skills. They could maybe make a promotional video for us that we could use on Facebook or something for the future coming in, or somebody that's going to assist us as an ambassador on our social media platforms, so that they will always share anything that we do, so it goes out to more contacts, etc., etc., which would fall under, I suppose, what you'd call micro volunteering. But there's all sorts of different things out there that organizations are trying that they've never tried before, because they don't want to lose their volunteers because they're out of action for so long. They want to keep them involved somehow, so they're thinking of the most inventive things. So have a look even and Be Collective at other organizations and what opportunities they're advertising, because you might be able to nick a few good ones.
Yeah, I've already have.
It's all about learning and sharing from each other, and sharing and learning from each other, obviously. And in your case, it's every organization is very unique.
Sorry, Raquel, I can't hear you.
Hello, Michaela.
You're very, very low.
It's just very faint, Raquel. I don't know why. Just very quiet.
Sure. Can you hear me better now? No.
No, still.
Okay, I'm gonna take the headphones. Hold on. Is that better?
It's actually your mic.
It's on the mic. Well, anyway, I'm going to move forward to Alan. Alan is starting, similar to Kellyanne, tentatively reintroducing volunteers. So it'd be good to see what they've been up to, and it would be similar maybe activities. So Alan, are you happy enough to give us a quick overview of your volunteer program? Thank you.
Yeah, overview of where we are at the moment. So I'm Alan McCroft, and I'm volunteer coordinator with Born Heritage Trust. And we're an environmental charity. Our role basically is environmental management in the Mourne Mountains. And normally I would have maybe just 2 days. I would have 2 days a week of volunteering activities. We have a team that would work in the mountains doing repairs on walking trails. Maybe up to about 6 people in that team. And then the second day would be working with the garden group. We have tree nurseries, growing native trees. We have a pool of about 30 people who would volunteer in that particular group, generally about 20 people per day. So obviously lockdown started, that all stopped, and all the other sort of larger events that we would potentially have through the year. We would have volunteer events like beach cleans and so on, which would maybe be a couple of hundred people through the course of the year. So all that stopped basically in March, and then as lockdown eased, we were seeing huge numbers of people coming to the Mourns to use it for walking, for recreation. There were big issues then with litter. A lot of the key hotspot sites that people would go into and visit became very badly littered, and also there's a lot of litter starting to appear actually in the mountains because of the huge numbers of people going into the mountains. So at that stage, we actually started to get a lot of contacts through our social media, through our More Live Facebook page, of people sort of flagging up the issues of litter throughout the Mourns. And a lot of them actually wanting to do something about it, or doing stuff about it and posting what they had found, what they'd lifted. So at that stage, actually, what we did was we started to engage with those people that were flagging up the issue of littering, and trying to support them, just supplying them with equipment and guidance of what areas it might be needing litter lifts, and supporting them in terms of, we gave them the kit, we gave them bags, litter pickers, and then we did pickups of whenever they had collected litter. We would do a pickup. We would send one of our guys around to do a lift from a car park or wherever they were leaving their litter at. So that was sort of how we were sort of engaging with people without actually being hands-on volunteering as such with them. We didn't actually engage with them. They basically were able to work individually, but with a bit of support from ourselves. And that was part of the program. We were trying to record where all this litter was appearing, not acting, where we needed to focus the attention, and flagging it up, of course, to the council. The issues were there. So we've started now actually to try and bring back the guys that are doing the path work, the mountain trail work. Again, so there's issues there with sort of social distancing initially. A lot of the work that is involved in building quite work. So it would be almost face-to-face work if you're lifting really large boulders or the like of that. So we have to try and work out a way of doing our work more or less as individuals, keeping our distance. Also, you mentioned about, I think you mentioned about gardening tools, having your own set of tools, basically to work with, no tool sharing, and sanitizing tools. So we're trying to work out, what's a good set of tools for each of the guys to have. We're going to try and equip them with a set of tools that they can carry in. Again, there's a weight issue, because we're having to trek into the mountains to some distance. So we have to have a set of tools that the guys can carry. But again, there's some heavy tools that we may have to share at some stage, so we're going to have to work out what's the best way of working with shared tools, whether it's sanitizing, gloves, or whether we have a set of tools that they particularly use, and then we stash them in that location and then come back for them. But yeah, we've had two volunteers back doing that sort of hands-on path work, and we're finding sort of the distancing issue isn't too bad, and we can do small-scale repair work on the paths fine without having to be, in close proximity. But there's still a way to go with that. We need to bring some more of the other guys in that team back in gradually and get them used to working in the system. The gardening side of things, we're not. We're probably thinking of maybe 1 or 2 people. The problem is that most of the people that are in that gardening group would be considered have health issues that could leave them vulnerable as well. So we can't really bring them together in one location. And it's also, there's equally, there's an issue with the nursery being, it's a nursery attached to a gate lodge, which is also our staff offices. And normally the volunteers would have used the same sort of kitchen facilities, bathroom facilities within that building. So we don't have a separate location for them to work and access those from. So there's a bit of a problem with that. So we're going to be very cagey about phasing in the gardening groups. Just have to be, we'll bring in one or two at a time and see how that works out. And maybe again, maybe someone coming in on different days. So yeah, that's really where we sort of find ourselves at the moment.
Thank you, Alan. How did you decide which two were to come back?
Well, they were the ones that were only available at the time, but
okay,
they actually two of the most experienced pathwork.
Okay, so that wasn't so contentious.
They've been for 5 years, you know, so that wasn't too much of an issue.
Great. Thank you for that, Alan. I'm conscious of time, so if people have questions, any other thing that they want to share, and then I'll just resume at the end, so you can unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead, Kellyanne.
Sorry, just another quick one, maybe just on overall management of volunteers, but I just wondered what sort of ways people use for contacting, and sort of if you've got a database of volunteers, how you, you know, do you use WhatsApp, or is it just via email, or what? How do you find, have you got a way that your volunteers can be communicating with each other as well as the organisation,
Yeah, well, we use WhatsApp for our team squad, so there's a couple of on that WhatsApp, maybe a dozen people. Probably never have any more than 6 would actually be involved on a particular day, but 12 in that squad, they can sort of converse on that as well. So they've been going sort of messages back and forth.
So it's per team, you would have a group per team?
Well, yeah, well for that path team, that's what all just one side of that aspect is covered by one WhatsApp. The gardening guys done a WhatsApp. Just contact them again if you need. So on.
Okay, thank you.
I would use email initially, and because there's so many of them, email's the best way for me. So we do have like an internal database, but once they're settled into a team, either with the gardeners or the rangers or whatever team they end up in, they can then opt into a WhatsApp group for that particular team. So the volunteer manager will then, you know, sort of contact them through WhatsApp, and they can opt into that if they want to. They don't have to, but it's much better if they do, because they then get the social benefits as well of being part of that group. So it becomes quite a nice extra way of belonging. So that's what we would do.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. We're similar, Kellyanne. I run or manage a team of event volunteers, so obviously there's no events at the moment, so I would keep in touch before, you know, whilst there was events, via a fortnightly newsletter that I sent via email, and then anything more pressing I would text or phone, and then they have a social WhatsApp group that I'm not part of. So if I need, there's 3 kind of champions in that group. So if I need messages put out, I would text or email them or call them, and they can put it out. But it really, the purpose of that WhatsApp group is to be a social way of those people keeping connected. It's obviously only kind of more active during events, as people will give lifts to each other if they live in the same area. You know, we'll say, what time is who's doing the shift at 7 a.m. or things like that. So that's how it operates, because events volunteering is more of a casual kind of opportunities. So that's what we would use, and community projects is maybe slightly different, but it's yeah, whatever suits. And you could choose a team leader, you know, within the volunteer team that maybe takes that responsibility, or as Jamie suggested, a digital champion, you know, someone who maybe just does the comms. Obviously that it comes from you, but then they can ripple it across the rest of the relevant volunteer team. So it's just deciding what might work best for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, guys? Or
just one final thing, that we're now moving into a phase where we look at having volunteers indoors, which feels like a next big step. And so that the Mansion House at Mount Stuart here is due to open, hopefully at the end of October. So we need our volunteers back for that. But as part of getting ready for that, we've actually got a group of volunteers. I've got 6 of them coming in next week to walk the route that we're proposing that visitors will use, to talk through the practicalities and the reality of volunteering in that kind of a space. So we get their voice in our plan making. It's all very well us sitting around making plans for them, but actually they're the ones that are going to have to be in the spaces interacting with visitors. So we thought it would be quite good actually to hear from them. So that's not a bad way of proceeding if you're trying something new, is to actually get the volunteers themselves to give you ideas, to discuss what you think will work with them and see if they can agree.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, any things that are worth consulting, always consult with volunteers, not for every single topic, but whatever involves them. That
something big like this.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Tammy.
Yes,
anything else? Happy enough. So what I'm going to say is just I'm going to summarize things for today, and thank you for attending, first of all. And what I would like to say is just to let you know, refer you to our website in terms of further guidance. So we're constantly updating things, and there will be a section just on volunteering, reintroducing volunteers in light of COVID. So that's on our homepage. When you go to the homepage, you'll see a section about COVID, and you click there, and there's lots of templates for risk assessments, sample volunteer roles, volunteer application forms in light of COVID, that you might have to ask slightly different things or not ask as many things and whatnot. So it's all there. So have a look, and any further queries, and we're constantly updating. So we updated it with the last kind of government guidelines, on gatherings as well, which does not impact on volunteering to our understanding in consultation with them. There's great training sessions. A lot of them are free or very low cost. There's a one that you might find useful, which is doing induction online. So depending, I don't think it's so relevant maybe for the roles that your groups that you involve volunteers in, but it could be for some other organizations. So if you think it's relevant, there's one there coming up, which is how to do now induction online with your volunteers, which obviously will be slightly different and things like that. So we just keep trying to update. As Jamie said, the Big Collective is the platform that Volunteer now uses within our website to advertise your opportunities and to connect groups and individuals to your roles. So of course, if you're looking to recruit, if you have a particular role or you just need new people, you put it out there, and we'll try to promote and help you push it further along the line. The other thing, just in terms of guidance, I know you all have your own mechanisms and everybody's following government and public health agency guidelines, but there is a little course that I mentioned in the first session as well, because it was just coming out at that time, which is part of a suite of customer service programs. It's called World Host. I don't know if you know the branding, but it's very popular in the tourism and hospitality sector. So any groups, organizations and companies that deal with customers, with guests, with visitors would normally try to train their staff under this program, which is worldwide recognized. And then you can get, a badge for your organization to show people that you've trained your staff and volunteers. So the World Host has created a very short e-learning program. So it's something that people can do on their own time, on their computer or tablet or phone. It should take like half an hour to 40 minutes to complete, and it's called World Host 2020. And it is basically how to provide safe customer service in light of COVID. So how to keep yourself safe when you're dealing with public, members of the public and visitors and guests, delegates, and how to keep them safe. So it'll go through the basics of hygiene and things like that. It'll go through contactless payments, but it's just maybe a little bit of reassurance that you can introduce to your staff and volunteers if you're not part of another network that already has provided something like that to you. You might find it quite useful. It is very, very affordable, so it's a £5 per participant. So you can get it through us. So if you just let me know that you have people that want to do it, all I need is their name and email address. I'll send the link to access for you to access the trainers portal. You complete it on your own time. You get an e-certificate straight after it's completed. So it might be something just to reassure you, to make sure everybody's working off the same hymn sheet, as Tammy said. You know, if you're a smaller group, you might not have that structures as of yet, or, you know, so this could be a good model of practice. So it's just a suggestion, and feel free to look into it. If there's anything you find useful that you want us to follow up after this session on an email, shout out, or if you identify that you want to connect with certain people, you know, when you can't find their details, just let us know and we'll ask them. So I see on the chat box, there's a few emails there being shared. And connections. So I'm going to stop the recording for now. So thank you for coming along, and then shout out if there's any other things that you'd like to share today.